forms the separation of charges is really important because it creates it's a battery essentially, and batteries can supply energy, and we have evidence that this kind of electrical energy is actually used by the body. Um, and that's why I was beginning to allude to that property, because it's quite important.
Right, and I think if we combine some of your work with Gilbert Ling's work, we can, draw some conclusions, at least about some of the applications of that energy, like in terms of establishing and maintaining the resting membrane potential, which is like the cellular batteries that could do electrical work.
Yep, absolutely. And if I may interject, you can think of it in a simple way. The cell is full of negative charges, and the negative charges, I argue, come from the EZ water or fourth phase water that fills the cell. And when you stick a lot of negative charges together, all they want to do is repel. They want to get away from each other as much as possible. And that amounts to potential energy. And when the cell becomes active, the electrical potential goes from negative to zero. It's called action potential, but it's actually deeply ingrained in a phase transition that I argue occurs when the cell becomes activated. But either way, anyway, the cell goes from a state in which it's got a lot of negative charges packed to a state where those charges are not packed anymore. And that's how it delivers energy. That potential energy gets converted into energy that drives the activity of the cell, the action of the cell.
And so, more specifically, what processes of the cell utilize the energy from that excessive negative charge? And I mean, are we talking about like reactions in the electron transport chain, for example, that may consume some of the reagents with those charges? Or are we talking about transduction into other forms of energy? What are the ways that the cells utilize this electrical potential?
In ways that we haven't fully explored yet, but we've explored at least one of them, and that is flow. There are the numerous flows inside the cell, inside the body. And we demonstrated, first of all, in the laboratory, that if you take a tube that looks like a section of a blood vessel, for example, but a tube made of material that's hydrophilic, water loving, and you simply immerse the tube in the water and horizontally to place it at the bottom of the chamber. You don't expect anything, but we found something. We found that the flow occurs through the tube, like through a straw, perpetually, essentially perpetually. So some energy's got to drive it, because you can't achieve flow without energy. And we found that it's this battery-like potential. I need to describe a bit more of it, but essentially, this electrical potential is used to drive the flow. And we found later that this energy is used in the cardiovascular system to help perpetuate flow. We all think that flow in the cardiovascular system is driven completely by the heart, is what I thought for many years. But it turns out there are a half dozen studies that demonstrate that if you stop the heart, flow continues. It doesn't stop. And I was as surprised as you are, I think, or were, to find out about this. And we could confirm it in the laboratory. Same thing. So it means that it's not just the heart. There must be something else that's working along with the heart. And we found indeed that it is experimentally confirmed that it is this flow phenomenon that I just mentioned that's actually responsible. And so what we confirmed is that in our cardiovascular system, mine for sure, maybe yours too, it's 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 not just the heart that's doing the work, it's the vessels as well. So the energy we're talking about, this battery-like energy, which there's so much for me to say, to describe, in order to make this sound more realistic, it is at work. So that's just one example that we know of. in which the battery-like energy is getting used.
Well, now I want to just emphasize the importance of this discovery because we have two other things that are relevant. So one is that it was not very believable that the heart would be able to pump the blood all the way to the most distal capillaries, where the diameter of those capillaries is smaller than the diameter of the red blood cells that are supposed to pass through them, right? So having another source of flow, and one where the actual exclusion zone may actually create room in those capillaries for the blood cells to get through. And we know red blood cells are charged on their surface as well, and that may contribute to the motion. But now we have something that actually is believable. And the experiment you mentioned, where you put a Nafion tube inside of a beaker of water and flow just starts and never stops. I mean, it's one of the most fascinating things, because if you didn't know the results of your additional experiments, like namely where the energy input is coming from, you would think it was a perpetual motion machine. But this is, a realistic explanation for capillary blood flow at a minimum. I'm sure that it explains all the blood flow. And also in parallel, we have this new research on the heart, that the heart is most likely not even a pump primarily. Like, it may have some pumping action. It may actually be a vortex generator more than a pump, but the whole structure of the heart is not what it is in the textbooks, that it actually can be unraveled in a helical structure, and that the contractions of the muscle clearly would create vortices. And this has become fairly mainstream. You even have doctors, cardiologists at UCLA talking about this. And of course, there's some doctors in Spain and elsewhere who have championed this idea. So this definitely fits with what we now know about water's ability to flow spontaneously. And I think, you've also shown other ways this energy can be utilized, but perhaps you could educate the audience on where does the energy come from that allows water, or what are the necessary